Welcome to richplanet.net, the programme which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's programme is about glowing orbs. There have been many reports in the UK and around the world of people witnessing glowing spheres, usually amber in colour, moving around in the sky. The phenomena has gained attention in the national press after thousands of people around the country witnessed and photographed the orbs. Chinese lanterns are often cited as the most likely explanation for these balls of light.
There are such things as Chinese lanterns, and they can vary in shapes and sizes, and they can maybe be up to 6-7 feet high. And they're usually tubular in appearance, and they're lit from the bottom. When they're lit, they go into the sky, and they're purely governed by the wind. You let 10 off, and they go in different directions, governed by the wind. They rise and fall on the thermals of the air. What you find with certain reports of UFO footage involving orange spheres, orbs, whatever you want to describe them, is that the objects that are described by the witnesses do not move anything like that.
Not long ago, my local paper, the Evening Chronicle, reported that shocked onlookers watched in astonishment as glowing orange orbs hovered eerily overhead before gliding slowly out of the town of Stanley. One witness said, "I saw what looked like two golden globes just above the trees towards St. Andrew's Church. They were moving slowly from west to east, and there was no sound. I called for my partner to look as well, and sure enough, I wasn't seeing things. The pair rushed into the back garden to get a better look, and the luminescent objects were gliding across the sky." The witness goes on to say there were 4 more going past silently as before, below the level of any plane or helicopter. There was a taxi driver who had stopped on View Lane, and I pointed them out to him. He couldn't explain what they were likely to be. I decided to seek out this witness, and after a chat with him, determined that he was convinced that what he saw was not Chinese lanterns. The witness was less than 50 yards away and saw 6 slow-moving, glowing lights just above the treetops. He told me that a taxi driver also witnessed the lights, and he spoke with the taxi driver, who said he saw 9 lights coalesce into the shape of a square before moving off. The taxi driver, he said, was so scared that he climbed back into his taxi. I thought I would knock on a few doors and find more people who had witnessed the lights. Jean Doran recalls here seeing one of the objects just a few feet above her rooftop.
And then I sat out for a while, and then I decided, I was going to go in and go to bed. So I walked up the steps to see where Millie was, and I looked around, and I just happened to look up to the sky, and I saw this bright orange yellow light. It was quite low, not very far above the roof top of the house. I followed it, I turned round and kept on watching it, and as I was watching it, some neighbours from the street above who were sitting outside said, "Oh, look at that, look at that." So I continued to look at it, and then it just disappeared. There was no sound, just this bright glow, no sound. It was sort of more of a square shape than round. There was nothing to distinguish by because the light was so bright, and it was gliding quite slowly across because I turned round and I just watched it until it had disappeared. It moved very, very slowly. I wasn't scared, I just thought, oh, that's strange.
A neighbour of Jean's claimed that her Xbox video game she was playing froze up about the time the lights were spotted over the rooftops. And another neighbour, further along the same street, saw a glowing object later that evening, this time higher in the sky.
What I saw was a bright orange light, a few thousand feet up, coming from over Stanley, crossed over the top of us. I would say around about the 12 o'clock mark, maybe after. It was orange with a yellowy glow to it. Well, the first thing that went through my mind was something's on fire up there. As it was moving, it didn't make sense, so I got the other people in the house out. We all had a look at it, Nobody could make their mind up what it was. So I came up with a conclusion, maybe, well, it was my wife who came up with the conclusion, maybe it was a balloon. But what the hell would a balloon be doing up there at 1 in the morning? This was quite big. This was a big glow in the sky, this. Quite large, a balloon size. By the time we lost sight of it, it was over Gateshead, heading out to sea. Right. We lost interest. It was there for a long time.
It all seemed very bizarre, perhaps even a bit Bob Lazar, until 2 days later, when the Evening Chronicle reported that some friends had indeed set off 6 Chinese lanterns in their garden nearby during a birthday celebration immediately before the time of the sightings. But the taxi driver said he saw 9, and why did they form the shape of a square? And why were there 3 totally independent witnesses convinced that these were not lanterns? In order to satisfy these remaining doubts, I needed to find the person who set off the lanterns. I managed to trace one of the people the Chronicle reported as setting off the lanterns. I questioned her, and she confirmed that she and her friends did indeed set off Chinese lanterns from a house nearby on the evening in question. The following week I was staying in Torquay, and by chance some lanterns were set off across the other side of the valley from where we were staying. I quickly got the camera out and took some footage. It was obvious to me that these were lanterns, mainly due to the flickering caused by the flame, which could be clearly observed. One must bear in mind, however, sometimes people cannot distinguish these lanterns even at very close range. Detective Constable Gary Heseltine has had many reports of orange orb UFOs. I asked him to explain whether these sightings could all be passed off as Chinese lanterns.
Now, people tend to immediately search for an answer, and the most common one given in the newspapers is this Chinese lanterns. Well, fine, on some occasions it probably is Chinese lanterns, but when objects stay in formation and move across the sky and do not change pattern, I defy anybody to recreate that on video or otherwise with a magic lantern. You often have multiple witnesses who will describe seeing 5 objects or 6 objects passing across the sky in 2s and 3s, and then suddenly 2 will stop whilst the others are moving. Then some of them may even reverse back in the direction that they came. Sometimes they're often described making precise patterns over rooftops. I have had access to some footage that came to me in 2004 from the Fleetwood area, and literally over a series of about 4 successive years at various times of the year, the same couple began to notice objects low on the horizon coming literally down the street, and then would stop and make patterns in the sky. Now, I became involved in this after the second sighting. They tended to keep a video camera in the windowsill just in case they ever saw anything else, and have subsequently gone on to record things. Well, on the second occasion, they'd recorded approximately 18 minutes of footage of 6 objects, and the footage itself contains some superb examples of what I call orange spheres. They described 6 orange spheres, and quite clearly the video footage that was recorded on that second occasion showed 6 objects. It had perspective because at various times the cameraman pulled back and you could see across the road a street scene, roof, apex of roofs, and you could also see street lamps that would give perspective and also give perspective against the movement of the objects. Really, the interesting footage begins after 9 minutes, and that footage quite clearly shows 2 groups of 3 objects manoeuvring in the sky. There's clear dynamics of 3 objects being fixed above a roof, and then 3 other objects emerging from behind a street lamp in the view, and then moving at this angle 3 towards the other 3. The 3 then become 5 with 1 lead object, and they make like a horseshoe shape, and then they go off for a little bit, and then they turn into what I call dominoes. There is 1 object leading, and then there's a row of 3 like you'd see on the side of a dice a geometrically 45-degree angle, and then there is a break, and then there are two, and then they literally go out of sequence. But that second sequence is approximately 9 minutes as well. So in total you have 18 minutes of objects manoeuvring in clear, concise patterns that I cannot think of any terrestrial explanation. When you look at the clear movement, there is clear intelligence behind the movements. There is no noise associated with these lights that the witnesses have heard. This is a family. Some of the family actually go outside while the film is going on, and the background corroborates that. I have no doubt whatsoever that the footage is genuine, and the manner in which the objects move, you can rule out planes, helicopters, balloons, microlights, flares. They do not move in any formation like that. And so for me, they're a genuine unknown.
In addition to the family who filmed these lights, a group of fishermen also witnessed the lights earlier that evening coming from the sea.
I became aware of this footage having actually been sent an email from what turned out to be a night fisherman who was on the beach at Fleetwood on the same night, who was with a group of 3 other fishermen who I eventually spoke to on the phone, and there were 2 other fishermen that they knew, younger boys, but they also knew, and I was able to get their contact numbers and spoke to them, and they all described 6 objects effectively out at sea, manoeuvring up effectively from the horizon and moving up into the sky, making strange formations, or precise formations. And this was approximately half an hour before the sightings that were recorded on film.
And a lady actually witnessed one of the orbs at close range hovering in her garden.
Eventually that led me to another witness who was nearby on the same night, who was, I think, the wife of a fish and chip man, and literally she'd been out in a garden and saw, which sounds bizarre, an object the size of a basketball that was white, hovering in a back garden, literally at 20 feet high, which then rose up into the sky, and as she watched it, it suddenly divided into 6 orange orbs. This may or may not be related, but it's one hell of a coincidence if it isn't. And this was all about within an hour to 2 hours of the footage, which we can place in definite time. Well, when we're talking about spheres, it then takes me, because of the research that I've done into what's called the fixed fleet footage phenomena. It first became apparent in the early 90s in Mexico. Jaime Muson, a famous Mexican researcher, has collected literally hundreds of examples of fleet footage. Now there we end up with a situation where we have anywhere from 6 to 500 to 1,000 objects manoeuvring across the sky that appear to be white spheres in broad daylight against cloud. Many sequences from many South American countries. Now when you look at footage in broad daylight against cloud where there's perhaps 1,000 objects moving in a fixed pattern across the sky, I can't think of any terrestrial explanation where we could effectively have a red arrows formation of 1,000 aeroplanes. It just wouldn't happen, and these objects stay in formation for, I think, something like a 3-minute sequence. As to the question about whether they're UFOs with occupants or whether they're remote, who knows? People have speculated that these are some kind of remote probe, and I probably tend to favour that. Because you know, that would seem the logical explanation, and certainly in 1 or 2 sequences there appear to be larger objects within the clusters that may well be controlling.
The next UFO video footage was taken in the Livingston area of West Lothian at 10:50 p.m. Friday the 16th of January 2009. The owner of this video wishes to remain anonymous. Returning home from a late shift, he went upstairs and noticed a glowing light out of the corner of his eye. He turned to look out of the window and noticed a bright orange orb. At first he thought it was a meteor or an asteroid and described it as a fireball. It seemed to be heading for the house. He estimated the size to be between 50 and 200 feet across, slightly smaller than a 737 aeroplane. He stood watching the object, and for a moment was quite stunned. Intensely bright orange in colour, and at least 300 feet in the air, there was no sound. He grabbed his camcorder and, as best he could, started filming out of the window. But by this time, the object had moved away northeast and increased in height. His hands shook as he balanced himself on the window and flicked the camera between normal and infrared night shot. The UFO then moved out of sight, so he ran downstairs and into the back garden, where it was still visible. As the light moved away, it suddenly moved sharply to the right and backwards. He described it as the most amazing sight he has ever seen in his life. It looked solid, but transparent at the same time, and was full of brilliant orange light. After a few short minutes, it was gone. It was more than just an orange light. It appeared to be a rotating orange light on top of a solid base. With the camera set on infrared mode, a saucer shape can be seen on top, with a very bright central light beneath, almost like a plasma. If that case doesn't convince you, then perhaps this one will. Filmed in broad daylight in Mexico by a man who was casually filming an aircraft. Orange balls of light can be seen to be coming out of a central light and then dancing around with what appears to be intelligent, controlled movement. Let's see that again. Next, the object spews out dozens of smaller balls of light, which then continue to dance around in a controlled manner. If they are Chinese lanterns, I am Bob Lazar. Another possible UFO event which intrigues me is the wind turbine incident in Lincolnshire. The Sun newspaper made a big song and dance about this case.
I think the incident as a whole follows a classic pattern on probably disinformation, in the sense that the Sun led on that story as a newspaper headline literally for several days. And I think there was a couple of headlines, and then it was on page 3, page 5 type of thing, and they put a hell of a lot of attention into that. And what fascinated me is that in the early reports in the newspaper, it said that one of the arms was actually missing and hadn't been recovered. I found that very intriguing, because what do you do with a 35-foot arm? What I expected to happen did happen. There was all this talk that some people had seen lights, multiple witnesses, I think they'd even put a photograph in purporting to show some kind of a light that was seen near the time.
People reported sightings of UFOs on the night the damage took place, including a member of the local council who said, "We cannot rule out UFOs." One witness claimed to have seen a glowing light with tentacles flowing down to the ground. Perhaps this was a plasma discharge pattern sometimes associated with electrically charged UFOs.
People had heard a collision, but that all seemed to not count for anything. Certainly with the company that were involved, who said that we're going to send it off for forensic testing. Right up to the point that objects were being sent off forensic testing, they were saying, making a big thing of it, the Sun. And then what happened was, literally a week later, story's gone cold, you then see a very small little article in the Sun, literally 2 by 1, that says, the forensic report says this is down to structural faults.
The official explanation was that a blade had broken off because of a fault in the design which caused fatigue in the bolts which hold the blade in place. The blade came off and damaged the other blade on the way down.
I'd like to see that report in the newspaper.
The investigation report has not been published for public view and is not yet available under Freedom of Information.
Because they made such a big thing of saying that, this is unusual, this is UFO related, and the Sun have had a very big media campaign, certainly over the last 12 months about UFOs, and they were arguably a very sceptical newspaper up to that point, but they've now led with many UFO headlines, including police helicopters, things like that. So they did this major play on this story. Fascinating in the sense that there was no gouge on the ground, that you could see from the photographs that were displayed in the newspaper. There didn't appear to be, they initially said that one of the arms was missing, which was odd. And the other thing that intrigued me the most was the kinked arm, because the kinked arm was classically kinked as if it had been warped by an impact and bent.
I spoke to a representative of the company who install the turbines, Enercron. I suggested to him that a very large object passing through the blades could have caused the bolts on one blade to fail and bend the second blade at the same time. He said that he thought I was talking shit and stuck to his guns. Another thing which perplexes me is that if the joint which holds the blade in place did become weak, the most likely point the blade would fly off is when it is pointing directly to the ground. This is because, in this position, centrifugal and gravitational forces are both acting together to pull the blade away from the center. When the blade is at the top of its cycle, gravitation acts in such a way which pulls the blade towards the center. If the blade came away at the point of highest force, i.e. whilst it was pointing to the ground, the blade would have flown off to the side. Not very good if you happen to be walking your dog nearby.
They speculated over the days that it could have been perhaps some kind of stealth object that was being tested. Why would the MRD test an object in that kind of area? It infers, if you go along that premise, that the object was out of control and therefore wandered into the field of turbines. Well, if that was the case, if it collided with the turbine, causing one arm to fall off and one arm to be kinked, it would have to be of a massive size to still remain in the air, which I suspect it wouldn't have been able to do, and therefore you'd have had crash damage of either this object or a light aircraft. A light aircraft would have disintegrated. It would have took a wing off the aircraft, would have flown, there'd have been debris. If it had been a balloon, it would have got entangled, it would have come down. If it had been a microlight, something of that kind, a powered glider, it would have just brought it down. The sheer dimensions of this turbine, this was not at all a small turbine, it was a huge turbine, one of the biggest. So I find a lot of very intriguing questions, and for when they came out and said, okay, this is structural fault, that was it. It was a 2x1 article. Well, really, if the investigative journalist, having made a big thing of all these anomalies, you would have surely thought of said, right, here we go, let's have a good big article on this report. Let's have quotes from the report. Let's see who did the report. But it strikes me that this was a classic pattern of big build-up. We don't really want to know about the answer, and then they just accept the explanation without doing their job, investigative journalism, by quoting. Let's have somebody say an in-depth analysis of this report. Why would they just accept the first thing that's said? It doesn't add up, and it doesn't match the evidence of the testimony of the people around. It may be UFO related, it may not, but what I'm saying is that there are a number of questions that haven't been answered, and I think the Sun were derelict in not following up on the story that they'd built up in the minds of the public, and then they just dropped it. They appeared to just take the very first answer they'd been given.
Wind turbines do not always face the same way. The turbines work like a windmill by rotating its central shaft so that the blades always face the oncoming wind. This means that the housing at the top of the main shaft can rotate around the center. If something was to hit a blade with force, it's possible that the leverage created would force the shaft to rotate around to a different orientation. All of the photographs I have subsequently managed to find show that the damaged turbine is not facing the same way as the other turbines. Over the coming months, I will be speaking at various venues throughout the UK, including St Anne's and Newcastle upon Tyne. For details on future events, please log on to richplanet.net. You can also find details of my book, Aliens Before Gentlemen, and a selection of richplanet.net DVDs. Welcome to richplanet.net.
Do not move anything like that.
Not long ago, my local paper, the Evening Chronicle, reported that shocked onlookers watched in astonishment as glowing orange orbs hovered eerily overhead before gliding slowly out of the town of Stanley. One witness said, "I saw what looked like two golden globes just above the trees towards St Andrew's Church. They were moving slowly from west to east, and there was no sound. I called for my partner to look as well, and sure enough, I wasn't seeing things. The pair rushed into the back garden to get a better look, and the luminescent objects were gliding across the program, which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's program is about glowing orbs. There have been many reports in the UK and around the world of people witnessing glowing spheres, usually amber in colour, moving around in the sky. The phenomena has gained attention in the national press after thousands of people around the country witnessed and photographed the orbs. Chinese lanterns are often cited as the most likely explanation for these balls of light.
There are such things as Chinese lanterns, and they can vary.
The sky. The witness goes on to say there were 4 more going past silently as before, below the level of any plane or helicopter. There was a taxi driver who had stopped on View Lane, and I pointed them out to him. He couldn't explain what they were likely to be. I decided to seek out this witness, and after a chat with him, determined that he was convinced that what he saw was not Chinese lanterns. The witness was less than 50 yards away and saw 6 slow-moving, glowing lights just above the treetops. He told me that a taxi driver also witnessed the light.
In shapes and sizes, and they can maybe be up to 6-7 feet high, and they're usually tubular in appearance, and they're lit from the bottom. When they're lit, they go into the sky, and they're purely governed by the wind. You let 10 off, and they go in different directions governed by the wind. They rise and fall on the thermals of the air. What you find with certain reports of UFO footage involving orange spheres, orbs, whatever you want to describe them, is that the objects that are described by the witnesses